The sun hung low over the sprawling cityscape, casting long shadows across rows of towering metallic structures. These buildings weren't made by human hands. They were gifts from their rulers, the Vailith. For centuries, humanity had lived under the shadow of these ancient aliens, serving them without question. No one remembered a time when things were different. Humanity's past was like a dream that faded upon waking, a faint memory of something bright and colorful, but impossible to hold on to. Kale adjusted his goggles as he crouched beside a broken drone in the corner of the orbital factory. His job was simple: repair machines too old or damaged to function properly. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept him fed and out of trouble. Around him, other workers moved silently, their faces blank, their movements mechanical. They weren't slaves exactly, not anymore. But they weren't free either. The Vailith didn't need chains. They controlled everything through invisible threads of dependency and fear. As Kale tightened the last bolt on the drone, his eyes wandered toward the far wall of the factory. There, stacked haphazardly, were piles of scrap metal and discarded parts waiting to be recycled. Most people avoided this corner. It was dirty, dark, and smelled faintly of rust. But Kale often found himself drawn here during breaks. Something about the chaos appealed to him, even if he couldn't explain why. Today, however, he noticed something unusual poking out from beneath a pile of debris. A glint of light caught his eye, sharp and unnatural against the dull gray of the scrap heap. Curious, Kale pushed aside a few pieces of twisted metal until he uncovered what looked like an old data crystal. Its surface was cracked and dusty, evidence of its age, but there was no mistaking the faint blue pulse emanating from within. It was alive, or at least partially active. Kale glanced around nervously. If anyone saw him with something like this, especially something clearly not part of the Vailith's approved technology, it would raise questions. Questions were dangerous. Still, he couldn't bring himself to leave it behind. Tucking the crystal into his pocket, he returned to his workstation, pretending nothing had happened. Later that evening, after his shift ended, Kale hurried back to his tiny quarters. He locked the door behind him and pulled out the crystal. Using tools scavenged from the factory floor, he carefully cleaned and examined it. When he finally managed to power it up, static flickered across the small screen embedded in his desk. Then, suddenly, images appeared, holographic projections of a world Kale barely recognized. There were cities filled with towering skyscrapers, parks bursting with greenery, and streets bustling with life. People laughed, danced, and created art. Children played games outdoors instead of spending their days staring blankly at screens. The scenes shifted rapidly, showing moments of joy, struggle, and triumph. At one point, a woman stepped forward, her face fierce and determined. She spoke passionately about freedom, warning of dangers ahead. Her name flashed briefly at the bottom of the projection, Dr. Illyra Vance. Kale sat frozen, his heart pounding. This was humanity before the Vailith, before they took control, before they erased everything. For the first time in his life, Kale felt anger, not just frustration at his own miserable existence, but rage at what had been stolen from his ancestors. And yet, alongside the anger came something else. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to being human than following orders and staying silent. He knew he couldn't keep this discovery to himself. Grabbing the crystal, he slipped out of his room and headed toward Mira's apartment. Mira was his oldest friend, someone who always listened without judgment. If anyone could help make sense of this, it was her. As Kale walked through the dimly lit corridors of the factory complex, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life, and perhaps the lives of everyone else, was about to change forever. Kale's hands trembled as he held the data crystal, its faint blue glow casting eerie shadows on Mira's cramped apartment walls. She sat across from him, her dark eyes wide with curiosity and disbelief. The room was small, cluttered with tools, spare parts, and half-finished projects. Remnants of their attempts to make life bearable in a world ruled by the Vailith. But tonight, none of that mattered. All they could focus on were the holographic images flickering above the makeshift projector Cal had built. "Is this real?" Mira whispered, leaning closer to the glowing display. Her voice was soft, almost reverent, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile connection to the past. "It has to be," Cal replied, his tone firm despite the uncertainty swirling in his chest. "Look at it. The cities, the people, the way they're living. This isn't some propaganda or simulation. This is who we used to be." Mira nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the woman now standing center stage in the hologram. Dr. Elira Vance's words echoed through the room, her voice clear and commanding even after centuries. She spoke of freedom, warning humanity not to trust the Vailith, urging resistance against their promises of prosperity. It was a message so foreign to their current reality that it felt like listening to a story from another planet. "Do you think anyone else knows about this?" Mira asked finally, tearing her eyes away from the projection. "I mean, surely someone must have seen these records before." "If they did, they didn't tell anyone," Cale said grimly. "The Vailith don't want us remembering. They've erased everything. Our history, our culture, even our names. We're just workers to them, nothing more." Mira frowned, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the table. "But why? What do they gain from keeping us ignorant?" Cale hesitated, unsure how to answer. He had spent hours replaying the footage, piecing together fragments of information hidden within the crystal. One detail stood out starkly. The Vailith weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They hadn't arrived with weapons or armies. Instead, they'd offered technology, resources, and solutions to Earth's problems. Humanity had welcomed them willingly, only to find themselves trapped in a gilded cage. "It's control," Cale said finally, his voice low but steady. "If we forget who we are, we won't fight back. And if we don't fight back, they can keep taking what they need without interference." Mira leaned back in her chair, her expression troubled. "Taking what? What do they need from us?" Cale shrugged. "I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's costing us everything." He gestured toward the hologram, where vibrant scenes of human civilization contrasted sharply with the sterile, oppressive world outside. "This proves we were capable of greatness once. Maybe we still are." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the discovery hung heavy in the air, pressing down on their shoulders. Then Mira straightened, determination replacing doubt in her eyes. "We can't keep this to ourselves," she said firmly. "If there's more out there, if there are other records, other pieces of our past, we need to find them. We owe it to everyone." Cale nodded, though unease gnawed at him. Sharing this knowledge came with risks. If the Vailith found out, they wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone involved. Yet deep down, he knew Mira was right. They couldn't let fear hold them back, not when the truth was finally within reach. Over the next few days, they pored over the data crystal again and again, searching for clues. Hidden among the files was a set of coordinates pointing to an abandoned settlement buried beneath layers of dust and debris. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A thread leading them deeper into the forgotten history of humanity. As Cal and Mira prepared to leave the safety of their daily routines, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping onto a path with no return. But for the first time in their lives, they felt alive. The echoes of the past had awakened something inside them, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. The journey to the abandoned settlement was anything but easy. Cale and Mira traveled under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that blanketed the ruins of what was once a thriving city. The coordinates from the data crystal had led them here, to a place long forgotten by both humans and the Vailith. The air smelled stale, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of drones patrolling overhead. Cale adjusted the strap of his backpack, glancing nervously at the sky. "If we're caught out here," he started, his voice trailing off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Mira knew exactly what he meant. Venturing outside designated areas without permission was punishable by imprisonment or worse, but neither of them could turn back now. Not after seeing those images, not after hearing Dr. Elira Vance's warning. "We'll be careful," Mira reassured him, though her own hands trembled slightly as she tightened her grip on a makeshift flashlight. Its beam cut through the gloom, revealing crumbling walls and shattered windows. Besides, if this place really has more records, it's worth the risk. They followed the map etched into Cal's memory, navigating through narrow alleys and collapsed buildings until they reached their destination. A massive steel door partially buried beneath rubble. The symbol of an old Earth organization was barely visible on its surface, faded but still recognizable. It looked like some kind of vault or archive. "This is it," Cal whispered, running his fingers over the cold metal. "But how do we get in?" Mira knelt beside the mechanism, examining it closely. "It's locked, but it doesn't look like it's been tampered with. Maybe the Valeth never found this place. Or they didn't care enough to check," Cal muttered, pulling out a small toolkit. With steady hands, he began working on the lock, his mind racing with possibilities. What would they find inside? More holograms? Written records? Answers to questions they hadn't even thought to ask. After several tense minutes, the lock clicked open, and the heavy door groaned as they pushed it inward. A rush of stale air greeted them, carrying the faint scent of paper and decay. Inside, the space was vast, far larger than either of them had expected. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into the darkness, each one filled with books, files, and strange devices covered in dust. Mira stepped forward, her flashlight illuminating titles scrawled across spines. "These are human," she breathed, brushing her fingers lightly over a leather-bound book. Real human writing, not translated, not filtered by the Valeth. Cal wandered deeper into the room, his heart pounding with excitement and dread. On one shelf, he found stacks of digital tablets, their screens cracked but potentially salvageable. Nearby, reels of film and audio recordings promised untold stories waiting to be uncovered. This was more than just a glimpse into the past. It was a treasure trove of humanity's lost identity. But then, something caught his eye. A section labeled Valeth Operations. Curious, he pulled out a dusty folder and flipped it open. Inside were diagrams and notes detailing the aliens' resource extraction methods. One phrase stood out in bold letters: parasitic symbiosis. "What does that mean?" Mira asked, peering over his shoulder. Cal frowned, scanning the pages quickly. His stomach churned as realization dawned. "They're using us," he said quietly, "not just as workers, but as hosts. They're draining Earth's resources to sustain their species." Mira staggered back, her face pale. That's why they came here. That's why they stayed. The enormity of the revelation hit them like a punch to the gut. The Valeth weren't benevolent rulers. They were parasites, slowly killing the planet and its people to prolong their own survival. For centuries, humanity had served them willingly, unaware of the true cost of their cooperation. Cal clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. "We can't let them keep doing this," he said fiercely. "We have to tell everyone. Show them what we found." Mira nodded, determination burning in her eyes. "Then let's start gathering everything we can carry. Humanity deserves to know the truth." As they worked together, packing the most valuable items into their bags, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something monumental. The hidden archive wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a weapon for the future. And for the first time, Cal and Mira felt ready to fight. The weight of their discovery pressed heavily on Cal and Mira as they made their way back to the factory complex. Their backpacks were filled with books, tablets, and recordings from the hidden archive, each item a potential key to unlocking humanity's forgotten past. But carrying such treasures came with risks, and not just from the Valeth. Every step felt like walking a tightrope, balancing hope and danger. When they finally returned to Mira's apartment, Exhaustion etched into their faces. They spread the artifacts across the floor. The room was cramped, but it became a makeshift headquarters for what would soon grow into something much larger. They spent hours poring over the materials, piecing together fragments of history and strategy. One thing was clear: the Vailith had built their empire on lies, and exposing those lies could ignite a revolution. "We can't do this alone," Mira said firmly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "If we want to make a difference, we need help." Cale nodded, though his expression remained cautious. "I know, but who can we trust? Everyone's been brainwashed for centuries. Most people don't even remember how to think for themselves." Mira leaned forward, her eyes blazing with conviction. "Then we remind them. We start small, with people we know. People who might still have doubts about the Vailith. If we show them the truth, maybe they'll join us." It wasn't an easy decision, but Cale agreed. Over the next few days, they began reaching out cautiously to trusted friends and coworkers, people they believed might understand the gravity of the situation. Each meeting was tense, held in secret corners of the factory or abandoned tunnels where prying eyes couldn't see. At first, skepticism ruled the conversations. Some dismissed the idea outright, too afraid to entertain thoughts of rebellion. Others listened intently but hesitated to commit. But then there was Rin, a fiery engineer known for her sharp tongue and quick temper. When Cal showed her footage of Earth before the Vailith, her reaction surprised them both. "Why didn't anyone tell me this sooner?" she demanded, slamming her fist against the wall. "We've been living like cattle while they bleed our planet dry." Her anger was contagious, and within days, she brought others into the fold. There was Soren, a former soldier-turned-mechanic, who offered tactical expertise. Layla, a data analyst, helped decrypt old files and organize information. And Tarek, a quiet janitor with surprising connections throughout the colony, proved invaluable for smuggling supplies. Together, they formed a group they called the Remembrance, a name inspired by the archives and their mission to restore humanity's lost identity. Their first goal was modest yet critical: sabotage a shipment of rare minerals destined for the Vailith homeworld. These resources were essential to maintaining the alien infrastructure, and disrupting the supply chain would send a message that humanity was no longer willing to comply blindly. Planning the operation took weeks. Using blueprints stolen from the factory database, they identified a weak point in the transport route, a narrow maintenance tunnel where the cargo drones passed unguarded. On the night of the mission, the group moved swiftly, their movements synchronized despite the tension hanging thick in the air. Cale disabled the drone's navigation system, while Rin planted explosives rigged to detonate remotely. As the explosion lit up the darkness, cheers erupted among the team. But they quickly silenced themselves, knowing the noise would draw attention. Back at Mira's apartment, they celebrated quietly, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. For the first time, they felt a glimmer of hope. The sabotage hadn't just destroyed valuable resources, it had proven that resistance was possible. But as Cale looked around at the faces of his newfound allies, he couldn't shake the feeling that their actions had consequences. The Vailith wouldn't ignore this act of defiance. They were playing a dangerous game now, one that could cost them everything, or change the course of history forever. The sabotage operation had been a success, but the aftermath brought an uneasy calm. The explosion echoed through the factory complex, and within hours, the Vailith responded with brutal efficiency. Enforcers, towering machines controlled by the aliens, swept through the corridors, scanning for any sign of rebellion. Workers were interrogated, their movements scrutinized. Tension hung thick in the air, suffocating everyone under its weight. Cale watched from the shadows as drones patrolled the factory floor, their cold mechanical eyes scanning every corner. He clenched his fists, trying to steady his breathing. The Remembrance had taken precautions, dispersing after the mission to avoid suspicion. But paranoia gnawed at him. Had they left behind any clues? Could someone have seen them? Mira noticed his unease when they met later that night in her apartment. "You're worried," she said softly, handing him a cup of lukewarm tea. It was more of a statement than a question. I can't shake the feeling we're being watched, Cale admitted, running a hand through his hair. Every step I take feels like it's leading straight to a trap. Mira nodded grimly. We knew this wouldn't be easy. The Vailith aren't stupid. They'll figure out something's wrong sooner or later. As if on cue, a knock sounded at the door. Both froze, their eyes locking in silent panic. No one was supposed to know they were meeting here. Slowly, Mira approached the door and peered through the peephole. Relief washed over her face as she opened it slightly. Soren stood outside, his expression grim. We've got trouble, he said without preamble, stepping inside. Rin's gone missing. Kel's stomach dropped. What do you mean, missing? She didn't show up for her shift today, Soren explained, pacing nervously. And word is the enforcers hauled someone away near the maintenance tunnels last night. Too much of a coincidence. Mira sank onto the edge of the couch, dread pooling in her chest. Do you think she talked? Soren hesitated before answering. If they broke her, yeah, I think she might have. The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on all of them. Rin was fiery and passionate, but she was also reckless. She had always pushed for direct confrontation, dismissing subtlety as weakness. If the Vailith had captured her, there was no telling what information she might have given under duress. Cale slammed his fist against the wall in frustration. This is exactly why we needed to be careful. One mistake, and now everything we've worked for could fall apart. Calm down, Mira snapped, her voice sharp despite her own fear. Panicking won't help us fix this. We need to act. Fast. Over the next few hours, they scrambled to salvage what they could. Lila managed to hack into the factory's security feeds, searching for footage of Rin's capture. What they found chilled them to the bone. Grainy images showed her being dragged away by enforcers, her face bloody but defiant. Worse still, the footage revealed that the Vailith had already sent patrols to search the hidden archive, the very place where the Remembrance had discovered the truth about humanity's past. They know, Cale whispered, his voice hollow. They know where we've been hiding. Before they could decide their next move, alarms blared throughout the factory complex. Red lights flashed, bathing the corridors in an ominous glow. Over the intercom, a cold, synthetic voice announced, "All personnel report to designated checkpoints. Unauthorized gatherings will result in immediate detention." The message was clear. The Vailith were closing in. Mira grabbed Cale's arm, her grip firm. "We can't stay here. Grab whatever you can carry. We need to get out now." As they fled the apartment, Cale couldn't help but glance back at the cramped space that had become their sanctuary. In that moment, he realized how fragile their movement truly was. Betrayal wasn't just a possibility, it was inevitable. And yet, even as fear threatened to overwhelm him, a spark of defiance remained. They had uncovered the truth, and no amount of oppression could erase that. The narrow escape from Mira's apartment left Cale, and the remaining members of the Remembrance scattered and shaken. They regrouped in an abandoned maintenance tunnel beneath the factory complex, its damp walls dripping with condensation, and its air thick with tension. Each face carried the weight of betrayal and fear, but also a flicker of resolve. Rin's capture had exposed their vulnerabilities, but it had also clarified one undeniable truth. They couldn't fight the Vailith alone. If humanity was to rise against its oppressors, they needed more than a handful of rebels. They needed an army. "We can't keep hiding," Cale said finally, breaking the silence that had settled over the group. His voice was steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. "If we want to win, we need to tell everyone what we know. Show them who we really are, and what the Vailith have done." Mira nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. "But how? The enforcers are everywhere. We can't just walk up to people and hand out flyers." Leela, the data analyst, leaned forward, her fingers tapping nervously against her knee. "What if we use their own systems against them? The Vailith control all communication networks. Broadcasts, announcements, everything. If we hack into those channels, we can spread the message across every colony. Soren raised an eyebrow. That's risky. If they trace the signal back to us, we're dead. It's worth the risk, Kale insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. We've been running and hiding long enough. It's time to stop playing defense and start fighting back. With Leela leading the effort, the group devised a plan. Using stolen access codes and scavenged equipment, they infiltrated the Valith's central communications hub, a towering structure at the heart of the factory complex. The building was heavily guarded, but Soren's tactical expertise came into play as he mapped out entry points and escape routes. Timing would be critical. They had only minutes before the breach was detected. On the night of the operation, the group moved like shadows through the labyrinthine corridors. Kale carried a portable transmitter loaded with footage from the hidden archive. Images of Earth's vibrant past, recordings of Dr. Elira Vance's warnings, and evidence of the Valith's parasitic exploitation. When they reached the hub, Leela worked quickly, bypassing firewalls and rerouting signals while the others kept watch. Finally, the moment came. With a deep breath, Kale activated the broadcast. Static crackled across screens and speakers throughout the colonies, followed by a single phrase that sent shivers down spines. Remember who you are. The transmission began with scenes of humanity's former glory, cities alive with laughter, art, and innovation. Then came the harsh truths, diagrams showing the Valith's resource extraction methods, testimonies of oppression, and Dr. Vance's impassioned plea for resistance. For many, it was the first time they had seen such unfiltered information. Shock rippled through the population, followed by anger and hope. Within hours, protests erupted across the colonies. Workers refused to comply with orders, shouting slogans they barely understood but felt deeply in their bones. In some areas, riots broke out as people tore down propaganda posters and vandalized Valith symbols. Enforcers responded brutally, firing stun beams and arresting anyone who resisted. But the tide had turned. Humanity was waking up. Back in the tunnels, the Remembrance watched the chaos unfold on hacked surveillance feeds. Exhaustion and elation mingled in equal measure. They had lit a fire, one that could either burn brightly or consume them all. Kale turned to Mira, his voice soft but resolute. This is just the beginning. She smiled faintly, though her eyes reflected the cost of their actions. Yeah. And there's no going back now. Above them, the hum of enforcer drones grew louder, a reminder that the fight was far from over. But for the first time in centuries, humanity remembered itself, and nothing would ever be the same again. The rebellion was spreading like wildfire, but so was the Valith's retaliation. Enforcers swarmed the colonies, cracking down on dissent with brutal efficiency. Streets once filled with defiant chants were now littered with debris and stained with blood. The Remembrance knew they couldn't sustain this momentum alone. They needed help, not just from humans, but from someone who understood the inner workings of the Valith Empire. One evening, as Kale and Mira hid in a crumbling warehouse on the outskirts of the factory complex, an unexpected visitor appeared. She emerged from the shadows without warning, a tall figure clad in sleek silver armor that shimmered faintly under the dim light. Her presence commanded attention, though her face betrayed no emotion. At first glance, she looked like any other Valith, but something about her demeanor felt different. "Who are you?" Kale demanded, his hand instinctively reaching for a makeshift weapon hidden nearby. Mira stood beside him, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. The figure raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "I am Zura," she said, her voice calm and measured, devoid of the cold detachment typical of the Valith. "And I have information you need." Mira exchanged a wary glance with Kale before stepping forward cautiously. "Why should we trust you?" Zara tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "Because I know what my people have done, to your world, to others. And because I believe it must end." Her words hung heavy in the air, met with silence. Finally, Kale spoke. "Prove it. Give us something real." Zara nodded and extended her arm, revealing a small device embedded in her wrist. With a flick of her fingers, holographic blueprints materialized in the space between them. They depicted intricate schematics of the Violet neural control systems, the very mechanisms suppressing independent thought in humans. "This," Zara explained, pointing to a specific node in the diagram, "is the core module controlling human compliance. Disable it, and millions will awaken fully, not just physically, but mentally." Kale stared at the blueprint, his mind racing. If what Zora claimed was true, this could be the key to breaking the Vailith's grip entirely. But doubt lingered. Why would a Vailith turn against her own kind? As if reading his thoughts, Zora continued, "Not all of us agree with the path our species has taken. Some see the destruction we've wrought, the lives we've consumed, and feel only shame. I am one of those few." Mira stepped closer, studying Zara intently. "Even if we believe you, how do we know this isn't some kind of trap?" "I cannot prove my intentions beyond my actions," Zara replied simply. "But ask yourself this: why would I risk coming here, unarmed and alone, if I meant harm?" Her logic was undeniable, yet unsettling. After a tense discussion, Kale and Mira decided to trust her, for now. Zara provided critical intelligence about weaknesses in the Vailith infrastructure, including locations of secondary control hubs scattered throughout the colonies. She also revealed that the Vailith High Overseer had begun mobilizing reinforcements to crush the uprising. With this new information, the Remembrance devised a bold plan. Their next target would be a heavily fortified stronghold housing one of the neural control modules. Success would free thousands of enslaved minds, but failure would mean annihilation. As preparations began, Kale found himself watching Zara closely. There was something haunting in her gaze, a sadness that hinted at secrets deeper than she let on. One night, unable to shake his curiosity, he approached her. "You're risking everything," he said quietly. "What happens to you if we succeed?" Zara's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps redemption," she murmured, "or perhaps nothing at all. Either way, it is a price worth paying." Her words lingered in Cal's mind long after she turned away. For the first time, he realized their fight wasn't just about humanity. It was about every being trapped by the Vailith's corruption, even those within their ranks. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting light onto their makeshift weapons and plans, Kale felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they were more than rebels. They were harbingers of change. The assault on the Vailith stronghold was chaos from the start. Armed with crude weapons and fueled by desperation, the Remembrance launched their attack under the cover of darkness. Zara's intel had been precise, guiding them through hidden access tunnels that led directly into the heart of the facility. But precision didn't guarantee safety. Every step felt like walking into a trap. Kale led the charge, his pulse pounding in time with the rhythmic clatter of boots against metal floors. Behind him, Mira carried the device Zora had provided, a compact but powerful tool designed to disable the neural control module. Soren and Tarek flanked them, keeping watch for enforcers while Layla monitored communications, her earpiece crackling with updates from scouts outside. As they reached the main chamber, the air grew colder, tinged with an electric hum that vibrated through their bones. At the center of the room loomed the neural control module, a massive, pulsating sphere encased in shimmering energy fields. Its surface rippled faintly, as if alive, feeding off the thoughts and willpower of millions of humans. "This is it," Mira whispered, clutching the device tightly. "We can do this." Before she could move forward, alarms blared, piercing the silence. Red lights bathed the room as reinforced doors slid open, revealing a squad of enforcers. Their mechanical limbs whirred menacingly as they advanced, weapons raised. "Go," Kale shouted, stepping between Mira and the attackers. He swung a makeshift baton, striking one enforcer hard enough to stagger it, buying precious seconds. Around him, The Remembrance fought fiercely, using whatever tools they had to hold the line. Sparks flew as metal clashed against metal, the sounds of battle echoing through the cavernous space. Mira sprinted toward the control module, her focus unwavering despite the chaos around her. With trembling hands, she activated the device Zora had given them. A beam of concentrated energy shot out, connecting with the sphere. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening crackle, the energy field surrounding the module collapsed. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Across the colony, thousands of humans froze mid-motion, their eyes widening as decades of suppressed thoughts and emotions surged back. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the flood of memories. Others stood frozen, staring at their hands as though seeing themselves for the first time. In the streets, protests intensified as newly awakened individuals joined the fight, shouting cries of freedom. But victory came at a cost. As the module failed, the remaining enforcers redoubled their efforts, targeting anyone near the device. Mira barely escaped being pinned down, diving behind a console just in time. Kale and Soren fought side by side, their movements coordinated but strained. One by one, members of the Remembrance were forced to retreat, dragging wounded comrades with them. Amid the carnage, Zara stood guard over Mira, her silver armor gleaming even in the dim light. When an enforcer lunged toward them, she moved with startling speed, disabling it with a single strike. Her face remained impassive, though her breathing quickened, a rare sign of exertion. "We need to go," Zora urged, grabbing Mira's arm. "They'll send reinforcements soon." Reluctantly, Mira nodded. Together, they regrouped with the survivors and fled the stronghold, leaving behind a scene of both triumph and devastation. Outside, the colony was alive with newfound hope, but also grief. Bodies lay scattered among the ruins, reminders of the price paid for freedom. As they disappeared into the shadows, Kale glanced back at the stronghold, now engulfed in flames. They had broken the chains binding humanity, but the war was far from over. And somewhere deep inside, he wondered how many more sacrifices would be required before the final victory. For now, though, they had won a crucial battle. Humanity had taken its first real step toward reclaiming itself. The victory at the stronghold had awakened thousands of humans, but it also ignited a storm of retaliation from the Valeth. Reinforcements poured into the colony, their sleek ships blotting out the sky like an ominous eclipse. Enforcers patrolled every corner, hunting down rebels with ruthless efficiency. The Remembrance found themselves pushed to the brink, their numbers dwindling and their resources nearly depleted. Yet, amidst the chaos, hope burned brighter than ever. Humanity was no longer a passive workforce. It was a force to be reckoned with. Kale stood in a makeshift command center hidden deep within the ruins of an old subway system. Maps and blueprints covered the walls, illuminated by flickering lanterns. Around him, the remaining members of the Remembrance gathered, their faces etched with exhaustion, but also determination. Zara stood nearby, her silver armor scratched and dented from countless battles, yet she remained unyielding. "We can't keep running," Kale said firmly, breaking the tense silence. His voice carried both urgency and resolve. "If we don't strike now, they'll crush us completely." Mira nodded, her eyes reflecting the flicker of the lanterns. "But where do we hit them?" They'd fortified everything since the last attack. Zara stepped forward, pointing to a large structure marked on one of the maps. It was the Valeth Command Center, a towering fortress that served as the nerve hub for all operations on Earth. "This is where you must go," she said, her tone steady but tinged with gravity. "Destroy this, and you sever their control over the planet." Soren frowned, crossing his arms. "That place is practically impenetrable. Even if we get inside, how do we take it down?" Zara reached into a compartment on her wrist and produced a small, cylindrical device. "This is a destabilizer," she explained. "It's designed to overload their central eye, the core of their entire system. Once activated, It will disable every piece of technology they rely on. But using it means getting close enough to plant it, Leela interjected, her voice sharp with worry. And that's suicide. Cale clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He knew the risks, but he also knew there was no other option. Then I'll do it, he said, his voice cutting through the room like steel. I'll lead the assault. No, Mira protested immediately, stepping toward him. You're not doing this alone. I'm not asking, Cale replied, his gaze unwavering. You've done enough, Mira. If anything happens to me, someone needs to keep the movement alive. Before she could argue further, Zara spoke up. I'll go with him. Her words silenced the group. She turned to Cale, her expression unreadable. 2 lives are better than 1. Besides, I owe my people nothing. The plan was set. Under the cover of darkness, a coalition of freed humans and sympathetic Vaylith dissidents launched a desperate assault on the command center. Explosions lit up the night sky as rebel forces distracted the enforcers while Cal and Zara infiltrated the fortress. Inside, the air buzzed with energy, and the walls hummed with the power of the Vaylith's dominion. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors was treacherous, but Zara's knowledge of Vaylith architecture proved invaluable. They encountered resistance at every turn, guards, automated defenses, and traps. But together, they pressed onward. When they finally reached the central chamber, the sight took their breath away. A massive crystalline structure pulsed at its heart, radiating waves of light and sound that seemed almost alive. This is it, Zara whispered, handing Cale the destabilizer. Place it here. Once activated, we have less than 2 minutes to escape. Cale nodded, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. As he secured the device and initiated the countdown, alarms blared throughout the fortress. Guards flooded the chamber, weapons trained on them. Go, Zora shouted, stepping between Cale and the incoming fire. Her armor shimmered as she unleashed a burst of energy, creating a barrier just long enough for Cale to slip away. As he fled, glancing back only once, Cale felt a pang of guilt and gratitude. Zara had chosen her redemption, and in doing so, she gave humanity its chance to reclaim the future. The countdown ticked down, and as Cale emerged into the open air, a deafening explosion rocked the ground behind him. The Vaylith's reign was over. The war wasn't won yet, but the path ahead was clear. Humanity had taken its final stand and emerged victorious. The explosion that destroyed the Vaylith command center lit up the horizon like a second sunrise, its shockwave rippling across the land. For miles around, humans paused in their struggles, some mid-fight, others mid-step, and turned toward the fiery glow. It wasn't just the destruction of a fortress, it was the collapse of an empire. The oppressive hum of the neural control systems faded into silence, leaving behind a profound stillness. Humanity was free. Cale stumbled out of the wreckage, his body battered but alive. Smoke clung to his clothes, and his lungs burned with every breath, but he forced himself to keep moving. Behind him, the once impenetrable stronghold lay in ruins, its crystalline core shattered beyond repair. Zara had stayed behind to ensure the mission's success, her sacrifice etched forever in Cal's memory. Though grief weighed heavily on him, he knew she had chosen her path willingly, a final act of defiance against the species that had betrayed her. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the scared landscape, survivors began to gather. Freed from the mental chains imposed by the Vaylith, they emerged cautiously at first, unsure of what came next. But as they saw others stepping forward, faces filled with hope instead of fear, they found courage. Men, women, and children alike joined together, forming a sea of humanity reclaiming its identity. Mira reached Cale just as he collapsed onto the ground, exhaustion overtaking him. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she checked for injuries. "You did it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We actually did it." Cale managed a weak smile, his voice hoarse. "No, we did it. All of us. Over the following days, the remnants of the remembrance worked tirelessly to organize the newly awakened masses. Without the Vaileth's influence, people began rediscovering pieces of their past, songs, stories, traditions long buried under centuries of oppression. Monuments were erected not only to honor those who had fought, but also to celebrate humanity's resilience. Schools reopened, teaching lessons about freedom, creativity, and unity. Art flourished once more, filling walls with colors and streets with music. But rebuilding wasn't easy. The scars left by the Vaileth ran deep, both in the land and in the hearts of those who had endured their rule. Resources were scarce, infrastructure was crumbling, and trust between communities took time to rebuild. Yet, even in the face of these challenges, humanity persevered. They had learned that survival wasn't enough. They deserved to thrive. Months later, Cale stood atop a hill overlooking a bustling settlement. What had once been a desolate wasteland was now alive with activity. Farmers tilled fields, engineers repaired machinery, and children played freely under the sun. Mira joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to him and smiled softly. "Do you think Zara would have liked this?" she asked, gesturing toward the scene below. Cale nodded, his gaze distant but warm. "Yeah, I think she'd be proud." They sat in silence for a while, watching as the world slowly healed itself. Cale thought about everything they had lost, and everything they had gained. The fight had cost them dearly, but it had also given them something invaluable, a future they could shape themselves. As night fell and the stars appeared overhead, Cale felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The galaxy stretched endlessly before them, full of possibilities. Humanity was no longer bound by chains or defined by servitude. They were explorers, creators, dreamers, and they would never forget who they were again. The last rays of sunlight disappeared, leaving the sky ablaze with constellations. Somewhere among those stars lay answers, adventures, and perhaps even new allies. But for now, Earth was home, and it belonged to its people.